Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 834, and today's date is December 4th, 2015, and the title of this episode is The Current Economic Collapse News Brief. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, on this Friday, it looks like the high-frequency traders, the plunge protection team, push the market up to 300-plus points, coming from a negative area yesterday, which was around 200 or so points. And they always try to make Fridays be on a positive note going into the weekend. Now, the job numbers have come out today, and November jobs numbers rose to about 211,000, higher than expected, of course, which they expected about 200,000. The unemployment rate stayed constant at 5%, but don't worry. Next year is an election year, and that unemployment rate is going to drop 4.9%, 4.8%, and they'll continually manipulate the numbers to make it look fantastic. Now, what we're seeing is the average weekly earnings declined to $871 from $872 last month, which represents just a 2% increase from a year ago, matching the lowest print over the past year. This is the result of weekly hours worked declining from an upward revised 34.6 to 34.5. Now, what's very curious about all of this is that the participation rate is extremely low. We're at 38-year lows. Right now, we are at 94.4 million people not working. But the number of persons employed part-time for economic reasons, sometimes it's involuntary, sometimes these people are looking for work, increased by 319,000 to 6.1 million in November, following declines in September and October. These individuals would have preferred full-time employment, but they only can find the part-time jobs, or their hours have been cut back. So we can see right now, with the number of people who are out of the workforce because the government just doesn't count them, from those people who want full-time jobs but can't find them, those people where their hours were cut and they're looking for full-time jobs, they can't find them, we have approximately about 100 million people who really want a full-time job. And of course, the government is trying to convince us that no, these people do not want that. Right, they don't want to support their family, they don't want to pay their bills, they don't want to pay their rent, mortgage, they don't want to go on vacation, they don't want to feel secure. Nobody wants that whatsoever. And while they're telling us unemployment is fine, we're seeing more layoffs. American Car Foundry laying off 300 people, Newport News Shipbuilding 700 people. We know the holiday season is not going well. Sears is reporting a third quarter loss. And guess what? The fourth quarter is not going to be any better. I wouldn't be surprised if Sears closes down a lot more stores, or it completely goes out of business and it ceases to exist next year. Now, the Baltic Dry Index, which is the raw material used for manufacturing, is at its lows. It's around 563 points right now. It dropped below 500 points. It popped back up over 500 points, and now it's staying steady at 560. And this is a very, very low number for this time of year. We haven't seen something like this in a very long time. And the reason for it is because factories aren't producing. Manufacturing is down. Retail sales are down. And as we go into 2016, it is just going to get worse. The dry bulk shipping is feeling more pain. The shipping industry is not expecting to return to profitability until at least 2018. Some say 2017. I'm going to push that off a little bit longer because this economy is not going to just turn around. So research companies' dry bulk freight rate index, a measure of the price of shipping commodities, fell 14.5% in September from August and 4.4% from a year earlier. Freight rates are down 32% since their recent peak in December of 2013. And basically, Rahul Sarahan, Drewry's lead analyst, says demand has almost completely dried up. This tells you that this economy is completely falling apart. Now, since we've been having all these mass shootings, one would expect from all the people screaming gun control, gun control, gun control, and people getting killed from these mass shootings. Now, not everyone gets killed. Some of them are complete hoaxes. Some of them are false flags. Now, people get mixed up between the two. A false flag doesn't mean people do not get hurt. It doesn't mean there isn't some type of devastating act. I mean, the 9/11, 2 buildings fell. People did die in that. Actually, I know 2 of them that died in that building. So false flags and hoax are 2 separate things. But we've been seeing a lot of this, and you would think the way the government and the corporate media is spinning this, that everyone is, returning their weapons, no one's purchasing weapons. Well, actually the opposite is happening. And what we're seeing right now, people are saying, listen, the reason why I'm purchasing a weapon is to protect myself, the fear of stricter gun laws, and the feeling of uncertainty. And Black Friday, the background checks broke all previous records. And since this latest mass shooting, we're seeing a complete trend upward of gun sales. Now, out in Japan, we see Japan is going to launch their anti-terror intelligence unit overseas. And since the Paris attacks, Japanese authorities said, something, we need to do this. Now, of course, what we're going to see right now is they're getting involved around the world. They built a warship. There's no longer a pacifist nation. And they're going to get into the fight here. And this is what we're seeing right now. And they said the International Counterterrorism Intelligence Collection Unit will begin its operation on Tuesday. They thought it was going to happen in April 2016, but everything was sped up because what has been happening around the world at this point. And we know what is happening around the world. We are heading into war. And all the private Western Central Bank countries are now forming and coming together to push this war forward. We already see the mass buildup in Syria right now. Now, we know the USS Ross is being brought into the Black Sea. There's also 3 NATO frigates that are escorting and sailing into the Black Sea alongside the guided missile destroyer from the United States. And they're going to be in the Black Sea. And we know at this point, Ukraine is bringing up military assets to the contact line. And we most likely will see some type of false flag event or something to create the illusion that Kiev needs to attack the southeastern people and most likely Crimea. So we're going to have to watch that very, very carefully. Russia has begun delivering the air defense system, the S-300, to Iran right now. And we understand that Russia has called Erdogan out. And remember, Erdogan said, listen, if you have evidence and you can prove that I'm involved in this oil smuggling, I'll resign. Well, Erdogan already said that despite his promise, he's not resigning, which we knew that was going to be the case because government officials, politicians, they all lie. They never tell the truth. But what's really interesting about this is that the Turkish Prime Minister, Ahmet Davutoglu, I don't know if I pronounced that right, said the following, that Turkey, and more specifically, Erdogan and his family, are involved in the trafficking of illegal ISIS crude. So his own government, the people there, are calling him out on this, saying, yes, we do have evidence. Russia is absolutely right. And of course, the United States government, the central bankers, they're trying to spin this. Turkey's trying to spin this. I should say Erdogan is trying to spin this, where they're saying, no, Russia, they're purchasing all the oil from ISIS. Now, why would Russia do this? They produce and ship oil all over the world. There's no reason for them to do this. Now, we know the countries like Germany, which is sending in 1,200 ground troops into Iraq and Syria. We understand the United States is sending an additional 100 to 200 special op teams into Syria and Iraq. We understand the British Air Force is now bombing inside Syria. France is bombing. They want to bring ground troops in. And the Prime Minister of Iraq is saying, whoa, wait a minute. We do not want U.S. ground troops or any other ground troops deploying inside Iraq. This is an act of aggression. We have never requested troops in our country. Now, the question is, the Prime Minister is saying no, and the coalition forces are just doing whatever they want, and they're bringing in the troops. Basically, we have another invasion. They're invading Iraq at this time because they're not listening to the country. They're doing whatever they want, and right now, the rule of law is out the window. Now, France is doing surveillance missions over Libya. They're basically having their military aircraft carry out reconnaissance and intelligence flights over the areas where the Islamic State is. Sure, that's what they're doing. No, what they're doing is they're mapping out, gathering intelligence, because guess what's going to happen? There's going to be a major invasion in Libya to put the puppet government back in power. The French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle is going to be moving from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. It's being redeployed. We see many ships in the Mediterranean right now. We understand the Harry Truman is there with their strike force. We understand Russia has their ships there. There are reports that China has some ships in the area. The French aircraft carrier is still there. They're going to be redeploying that. And we can see this is, leading up to an incident that's just waiting to happen right now. Now, Putin is out there and he is proposing a united anti-terrorism front where all countries should come together to fight terrorism. Now, China is on board with this, saying this is a fantastic idea to create a united anti-terrorism front, acting under the UN control. And they're saying to the international community, we all must work together. We must track the flow of funds, find out how they're getting their weapons, and then that will lead us back to those countries that are supporting terrorism. Now, we know Israel, the United States, the coalition forces, they're not going to let this happen. They don't want this being tracked back to them. And they're not going to most likely agree with this whatsoever. Maybe out in the public forum, but nothing on paper. Now, we understand, we just had this false flag in San Bernardino where we had this mass shooting. Now, of course, we had the gun control, and it looks like they're leading towards terrorism right now, and they're pushing that meme right now where, yes, they're part of the Islamic State. Yes, the Islamic State is bad, and a lot of it's not making sense. But what's very interesting about this is that U.S. Rep. Matt Salmon and Tent Franks are now adding pressure to update the United States war authorization to basically fight the Islamic State directly. And Senator Jeff Flake has been pushing for a war bill, and it looks like that authorization for war now is back in the spotlight, and it looks like they're going to get ready to push this forward. And we know this is what these events are used for. They're used to take bills that are dying in Congress, light a fire under them, get people to look at them, and hopefully it gains traction. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of warnings coming out. They're saying from the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria, there is a possible terrorism attack waiting in the wings. They're warning all U.S. citizens to be careful in that area. And this whole San Bernardino shooting, they're really building up. But a lot of it is not making sense whatsoever. I mean, Farouk and his wife both passed the DHS terrorism screening. Nothing in their backgrounds. So right now, we know all this screening is, if you're going with the official story, is a waste of time if you're believing that this person was really a terrorism. But what's very interesting about this is that this entire story is not making sense. Now, his wife came in on a K-1 fiancé visa last year. And co-workers recalled Farouk telling them that he met his wife online. He was making a trip to Saudi Arabia, and he was going to marry her. He spent 9 days in Saudi Arabia in the summer of 2014, according to the Saudi embassy in Washington. Farouk returned to the U.S. in July of 2014. He brought his wife, his fiancée, back with him. They did the screening, nothing unusual about it whatsoever. I went through the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, absolutely nothing. And in order to obtain the green card, the couple had to prove that their marriage was legitimate. And, they had to provide fingerprints and pass all the screening tests, which they did. So this is why it really doesn't make any sense, because they were two people. He was a citizen, worked for the state, had a child. They were attending a holiday party at a disability center. And, of course, they're saying he just left, came back with fatigues, mass amount of weapons and pipe bombs, and he just decided to shoot everyone up. Again, no motive. And what we're seeing right now is, just with all of these type of false flag events, which is different than a hoax. Sandy Hook was a false flag / hoax because they were using actors. The school was closed. No one died. We know this from the FBI report when they issued the number of deaths, and they forgot to, well, actually there was nothing to include at that point. This right here most likely is a false flag where they come in and they will kill people if they have to prove their point. 9/11, buildings came down, people jumped, they died, people died in the buildings. So they're getting to the point where it's time for them to start killing people to get what they need to get. Which doesn't mean that this just happened out of the thin blue, out of thin air. It happened because they planned this event. And what we're learning right now is Farouk, he was in contact with the FBI. And we know this from other dealings that, yes, FBI speaks to these people, FBI uses these people, and for all we know, he might have thought that he was part of this drill, because when they found him in this SUV, which when you look at it, where do you go to rent that SUV? Secondly, he was wearing shorts. What kind of, special tactical gear is that? Makes no sense. And when we looked at him, where were the weapons? He was handcuffed. The whole entire picture of it didn't make sense. Their attorney says there's a lot of disconnects. A lot of things quietly don't make sense and they don't add up. And this is coming from attorney David S. Chesley. He says witnesses and investigators have both described a terrorist onslaught carried out with military precision by suspects who were trained and capable. He goes, the problem is Farouk and his wife, they didn't have the necessary skill set to pull this off. And don't forget, what happened to the third person? You notice how they're forgetting about that. It's just disappearing. So we can see at this point, this whole story is starting to fall apart. And what's very interesting today is that they allowed reporters into the couple's apartment. They're saying the landlord ripped off the boarded up door and allowed the reporters inside. Now, other reports are saying that the reporters forced their ways in. But the question is, this is a crime scene. I mean, we have the ATF, we have the FBI, we have the local police doing an investigation. Where was the police tape on the doors? Where was the police saying no one can enter this? Because think about it. In a police investigation, what happens if they have to go back into the apartment to look for evidence? They might be missing something. Now the reporters are in there touching everything, taking things, moving things, planting things. And we know things were already planted in there. But I'm just saying, this looks like a completely staged photo op. This is what's happening right now. And the reason for this is because the story is falling apart, and they need to continually show you that these were terrorists. And of course, we have one picture of a reporter looking at their passports. It always goes back to the passports, which is amazing. So they're creating a giant media spectacle, trying to prove their point, and this whole story is completely falling apart. Now, German intelligence is warning that Saudi Arabia has the stabilizing role in the Middle East. Now, it looks like these people were from Saudi Arabia. They're bringing up Saudi Arabia, and it looks like they might be using Saudi Arabia as the scapegoat for what's been happening in the Middle East at this point. Now, we know Saudi Arabia doesn't do anything without the United States. We know that Saudi Arabia takes their orders from the United States, but it looks like they might be, out there and hanging out to dry at this point. And we're going to have to watch that very, very carefully. Now, the Islamic State came out and they said France was the beginning. Tomorrow will be Washington. It will be New York. It will be Moscow. And they did this in a video. Of course, they didn't mention San Bernardino. Very interesting. And they're saying that whatever is coming is going to be much, much worse. Now, what I'm thinking at this point is that this story isn't gaining traction with the San Bernardino shooting. They're trying to pin it on terrorism. The gun control thing completely fell apart because if there's truly terrorists and you believe their story, their narrative of the story, you would want to be armed because terrorists are coming to the United States. And I think this whole thing is starting to fall apart right now. And what I think they're doing is they're preparing for the next false flag to reinforce what we've seen. And most likely it will probably be an act of terrorism because we know the authorization for war is pending in Congress. They want to push that. They want the war to start. They want more troops in this area. And I don't think this last false flag is doing what they really wanted. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.